Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to some of y'all, and peace out to the rest of you. Hit the share button because the message is more important than the messenger. So, make a long story short, I'm putting this one on YouTube. This is regarding that idness culture, and I'm going to tell you that if you really want to see any progress for, let's say, for black men, because we can't take the entire Western black population with us, ADOS or Caribbean, obviously, right? But in order for there to be an alternative route in life that does not hamper progress, but that also does not involve actually selling out. I don't mean being productive, but actually selling out, becoming a Republican or a conservative. We got to forge that path. And I want to give a shout out to SYSBM, IBMOR, and Passport Bros for carving that path, forging it, beating that trail. They're doing this. They're coming up with an alternative path for black folks, and I will specify black males, to go through life without having to only find credibility and validation on dim streets and in between the thighs and in the vaginas of the world's worst women on the planet. Just period. Because let's call it what that is. And I'm not talking about just Western black women. I'm talking about Western women. Now, this path is also one that Western black women can take. But that path is going to be a bit more difficult for them, and that's perfectly fair that it is. Because just like it's more difficult for them, the easier path for Western black women to take is already the default. But that path leads to more difficulty down the road. And what is that path? Well, that path is being a thought. That path is being a jerk. That path is being a B word, a hyena B word at that. That path is racking up high body counts with the least responsible men, the worst attitudes, that's that path. And then turning around later on, after you got 7 kids and the 8th is on the way, going on Kendra G's show talking about you need you a sugar daddy, you just need some help. And you want to be celibate in the meantime. See, when women talk that stuff after going that route, and we already know the Western women, they will turn around and marry and then be celibate in the marriage. And that's an abomination. The question is it worse to fornicate when you're not married, or is it worse to be celibate when you are? I'm not really sure which one is worse. I think the second one is probably worse. But that's the path, the default path that the Western woman can go. And many of them take that. That's why we call it the default. And in the meantime, they're rewarding the worst behavior. So what we got to understand is that, frankly, and I'm going to call names here without hatred, but I got to call these names. Frankly, that inward path it has to be more insulted by us than the alternative path, the academic path, the autodidactic path. And I'm not talking as an elitist, and I'm not talking as an overachiever either. We believe in a balance in everything. There's a time to crack them books and learn. There's a time to get in the gym. There's a time to swim. There's a time to work on the body. There is a time to work on the mind. There is not a time to play with guns over nonsense. There is not a time to get into gun fights with people who are not supposed to be your enemies over property neither of you will own. There is not a time to call the attention of the cops down on yourself. And this is something even street dudes know. People living that inward street life. I'm over here dissing. Even they understand this. And the truth be told, we need to start insulting people that want to take on these street personas. Because when you have people that have left those streets, they really want to leave that behind. And oftentimes the only reason they keep some of that persona with them, or some of the affectations, even though they should not, oftentimes the only reason they do it is because the youth won't listen if they don't. See, the youth who are raised by us N-words to be little N-words themselves make this mistake of thinking that you can't tell them not to go down that route unless you've been down that route. And if enough of us start to shame that route, then enough of us will be able to tell the youth, you ain't got to burn your hand on the stove to know it's hot and that it's gonna burn. And I don't have to have burn marks on my hand to tell you don't touch that hot stove. See, right now our youth are too foolish, they're too stupid. And the motivational speakers that are catering to them aren't quite that stupid, but they gotta act like they are. They gotta pretend that they're that stupid. They gotta pretend they don't see the pattern. Look at Terrence Gangster Williams out of New Orleans. Boosie looked up to him. Boosie says something about, man, you know, we got a code, we don't snitch. No, bruh, sorry, but Boosie, I'm sorry, that no snitching stuff, that's gotta go too. On one hand, there is a time for that, but that's actually a more revolutionary thing to do than it is just, I mean, in other words, the practicality and the wisdom of not snitching serves better in a revolutionary context, not just a street N-word thug context. Where, you know, I know my man, he shot that kid because he's bad with guns, but he still carries them. And he shot at somebody else, but he hit that kid, but I ain't gonna snitch though. No. Did you tell your friend not to do that stuff? Did you tell your friend to be careful when he aims? If he was trying to shoot at somebody else that was not a civilian, and he was a terrible aimer, did you at least go and tell your friend beforehand? No, so you're gonna cover for this, for your friend. And meanwhile, the kid that got shot, that crime's gonna go on. So that's what we doing? No, this is not a revolution. If it was a revolution, I'd be all for no snitching. There's a time for that. But if you ain't out there trying to fight D. Wyatt, man, which is not which means that this is not about some revolution, it's just fighting over bones on the street while Massa eats the meat, then that no snitching ethos has got to go. It's bad. It's evil. N-word culture. And how is this playing out in the manosphere? We got somebody my age, but because the B words in his hometown like him, he's sitting up here talking bad about the lameness of Passport Brothers, Passport Gang, and SYSBM. Failing to understand that in order for our population to continue in a functional and sustainable manner, we have to leave the West, because the Western woman is the world's worst woman. Wyatt or sister. You're going to have to go to Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines. In these areas, regardless of your religious beliefs, these areas have an abundance of single ladies that are willing to treat you well. And if you're looking to start a family and you're not just going for the Nash, even then, you can go into these areas. And I didn't even mention Latin America with the Afro-Latinas. If you want to keep it black, the point is that we got to get out of these so-called first world Western mindset locations and jurisdictions if what we're trying to do is keep start and sustain a functional and sustainable black family and therefore population. This has got to be done. You cannot jump. And you know what? If you don't want to start an entire family, but you still just want to be somewhat wholesome, you can't do that where you live. Your kid is going to be one of 5 from the same mother, one or more than that from the same mother. She's gonna have all these other babies, and maybe you the one maybe you're the one with whom she has her second. That's the highest likely scenario for many of you. How sustainable is that? You come along and you bring to your child what you're supposed to provide for your child, but then they siblings are mad. And now we got arguments. And we argue about these things on social media, but what is the argument that is never had? How about you be a good husband, you be a good wife, you be sustainable, you be someone with whom somebody else can stay in a marriage? How about that? Oh no. That's asking too mother cuss word much. You can't do that. That makes things too easy. That's exactly how many of you are going, how many of the women view it, and how many of you are playing into this. As soon as you start taking on street ethos and street affectations, and you start bragging about succeeding in any way that is socially acceptable according to N-word culture, and being able to succeed and get into the panties of the worst woman on the planet is part of that. And you got a man now calling other people out. Pull up, man. Pull up. This is my location. I'm talking about Minister Jap. Too old for this mess. You're too old to even not see the validity of our path with the passports. I'm not only telling you, and not just you, but others too, of that similar mindset. That is the same thing that these B words, these German shepherds and these hyenas complain about, because we're finding ways to not have to depend on them for physical health and below the belt satisfaction, which is a part of physical health. Since we find ways to not have to rely on them for it because they've proven that they're only going to restrict and weaponize it, they're upset, and now you are upset along with the same German shepherds that you rightly call German shepherds. You see through all their games, you telling us how bad they are, and now you upset because we wised up and said we gonna bounce? Oh, well, see, y'all can't get women over here, so you gonna go over there. Bruh, that's because the women over there are wrong. And you have to understand that with your intelligence, minister, the problem is that you still have failed to understand what the actual solution is. It is to abandon the German shepherd. It is not just to chase them down and try to get in the next set of panties for the next weekend. You do that in Chicago, and you have help doing that because they know who you are already. You got some fame in Chicago. You have a little bit lesser fame throughout the rest of the country. And you know that leaving the United States, you'd be the one at a disadvantage because it's a functional environment depending on where you go. I'm not going to tell you that the Anglophone Western Hemisphere is functional. No. You probably do just as well. It just might take you some time to build up that fame if you went to somewhere just as broken and dysfunctional as Jamaica. Yeah, I said it. And inshallah, tomorrow, I'm going to have somebody on to talk about that. Because some guys who are still beginning to travel or who have yet to travel and are trying to decide where to go first need to know where to go or where not to go. And that's why I'm going to do this. Shout out to the brother from Yard that agreed to come on and tell his story. Because I don't want people that don't know thinking that if they go to an Anglophone Caribbean island, that it's like they're going back home to some tradition. You're going to be going home to some inward traditions, halfway home. It ain't the continent. A lot of traditions are not intact, and a lot of them are. I'm sorry to say that, but that's what it is. You can grow up traumatized in a place like that because you value education. And that's not all. I'm not saying it's out of hatred either for Jap. I'm saying it's because, I am saying it's out of hatred for that inward culture. And part of that inward culture, whether any of us realizes it or not, is to validate the sexual selection of the Western hyena B word. She's wrong. There's no getting around that. She may have a right to make her choice because she's going to be held accountable for her choice like any of us will. That's why anybody ever believed in Judgment Day to begin with. It is a necessary belief to have to make sense for why we're here on this planet with the moral capacity that we have in the first place. But by the same token, That does not mean that they're right to choose the worst guys and sexually reward them with all the reproductive success and then not hold them accountable and then turn around and try to bring the bills for that to the kind of guy you would never want actually reproducing. That she would never want actually reproducing, and that's most of us. 85% of us and upwards. Like that's okay and that's just normal. No, she's wrong. It's just her preference. Her preference is wrong. And it's definitely wrong for what any nation wants to do. It's definitely wrong for even what any ethnic group wants when they're not a nation. You got women living in jungle societies. You want to talk about nature and what they naturally like. You got women living in the Amazon, sitting up and saying, this man, he's not the best fighter and he's not a wimp either. He's not the strongest. He's not the weakest either. He's a normal guy, but I like him. That's the one I want to marry. You got women saying this. I saw the videotape and I saw the subtitles translated into English as she was telling the cameras this. A normal guy, but he was her type. And she was cute. And this is who she wanted to marry. This is a normal thing. And Western women, especially sisters, would have sat up and looked at this and they would have said this one or two ways. They would have said it's her right to choose. Okay, fine. But you know what they would not have done? They would not have looked at that man and seen how normal he was to look at on the outside and then said, yeah, that it's her right to choose. Then they wouldn't have said that. Because when you start to apply that to when she's attractive and you're her type and you're a normal guy, then they don't respect us even in each other. And that's because more than they love each other, which they don't, they hate you, gentlemen. They hate you, Minister Jap, even when they're spreading their legs for you. And in funky, filthy, trifling, nasty apartments they keep exactly as you told us. There's a hatred and a contempt they got for you too. You sat up here and you sided, and you're not the only one, you're the one I can remember right now. You sided with the dating roaches in order to uphold N-word culture. And N-word, some of you say, well now, Black Mind, are you talking about street culture or are you talking about the club culture? What's the difference? My friend, Saad Imam, on his channel, Amu Yum Yum, had a show this morning my time, last night you all's time. And it was about the African-American experience with violence and how it has shaped our view of sex. And I haven't even seen it yet. I was asked to go on, but I knew I wasn't going to be able to go on there. But you know what? Let's talk about that for a second. Just the title. Let's talk about that. Well, what is the answer to that question? It's very simple. Our experience with violence is we were treated very violently by our enemies, our kidnappers. And some of you are going to say, no, bro, it was the Africans that kidnapped us and sold us off. Okay, well, the ones that bought us then. The colonizers, whatever you want to call them. The treatment of us, not just in the U.S., but throughout the Americas, was violent. There was a time when the average life expectancy, whether it was in what became the United States, back when they were colonies, or rather it was in the Caribbean or in South America, was 7 years. You landed, and 7 years you were expected to live, and you would pass away from being overworked, exhausted, underfed. You'd be dead in 7 years on average. That's on average. That means there were people that died sooner than that. So that's the kind of violence and exhaustion to which we were subjected. Okay, great. We got that. Guess what else? In the United States, ironically, this did not happen in Brazil. This did not happen in the Dominican Republic. It did not happen in Colombia. But for whatever reason, amongst the Anglophone nations, the ones that were colonized by England, the ironic thing is that the view of violence became her, meaning the sister's, way of assessing whether or not a black man was worthy of reproduction, sexual satisfaction, any of these things. That's how they decided. That's how they determined it. And that's the main basis by which they determine it. What violence have you committed against other black men? And that's there you go. That's the answer to that question. So to me, the club culture and the street culture are the same thing. They're equally as destructive. I'm telling you now. See, here where I live in Saudi, it's estimated that 10% of the population is black. It's an estimate. The government does not keep racial statistics. It's just a guesstimate. You go into some areas and it can be as high as 90. There's a town about, maybe it's about 2.5 hours drive from Medina. And that town is considered to be like somewhere between 90 to 100% black. But I can tell you that if you introduce this foolishness into that culture, then black families, they will not be sustainable. That's what we're dealing with right now. That's how bad this culture is that was given to you. And when you can't sit up here and only blame bondage, that's a part of it, but you can't only blame bondage for that because, see, look, it's not like that in the DR. It's not like that in Colombia. It's not like that in Brazil. And I'm talking amongst the black Brazilians, the black Colombians, the black Dominican. Well, most of the Dominicans are black, just don't want to admit it. But you get the idea. You don't have to be violent and have bodies on you in order to appeal to them. And if she's suburban and she ain't ghetto, she really don't want that street stuff, and that's not a criteria for her. Now stop and think about that too. I've been going on for long enough. So I'm gonna leave it at this. And thank you all for listening again. As for the Patreon, there's something I plan to address on there. On the Patreon, I plan to talk about what actually part of this N-word culture. But I plan to go more in depth on the argument about which one is the prize, the man or the woman, and what that actually has to do with the dating coaches and the dating roaches. So thanks for listening. As always, black heart, black mind, black out, assalamu alaikum, and black heterosexual, non-select, non-itness, non-stereotypical, non-street male power just because Boom Chic and Bonquisha don't like it, and black patriarchy until extinction or judgment day.